Hello, everybody. My name is Anya. We're back here with another virtual pop-up. I'm here with.
My name is Mateen. I'm also a peer care intern like Anya, and we're here with Steve. Would you mind telling me about yourself, Steve?
Sure. My name is Dr. Steve Palmeira. I'm a staff psychologist and our assistant director for outreach here at the Counseling Center.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Steve, for joining us today. We have a few questions that we wanted to ask you and just really get to understand or give like a quick preview of what the Counseling Center has to offer to students. And so we could go ahead and get started. So for the first question, what resources does the Counseling Center recommend and offer to students currently on the waiting list in order to receive like counseling at your office?
For sure. So it's important to really start by saying the one service that typically does have a wait time at the Counseling Center is individual therapy. Right now, students are only waiting about an average of a week or so before getting picked up for individual therapy, which is pretty quick compared to most practices where you might be waiting like up to several months for an appointment. So we are able to get a lot of students in pretty quickly for even individual therapy, which is the one service that does usually have a bit of a wait. The Counseling Center also provides a really wide range of mental health services, and students can access these with little or no wait time for the most part. For instance, students that are experiencing a mental health crisis and truly can't wait for services, we provide 24/7 crisis intervention. You can access anytime calling the Counseling Center, even after hours. It doesn't matter if it's spring break, if it's a holiday, if it's 3 o'clock in the morning. If you're experiencing any kind of mental health crisis, we're here for you 24/7. We provide single session appointments too that students can schedule online. You just log into the Counseling Center website, and that's a 25-minute, 30-minute appointment with one of our therapists that mainly kind of focus on solving a specific problem or addressing one specific concern. It tends to be a bit more solution focused, shorter term, but it's really nice that students can kind of schedule those online within 24 hours. We do a new program that we're offering is a series of drop-in spaces for students. Like we have one for neurodivergent students, for first-gen students, for international students. And we'll probably be changing those up throughout the year and throughout next academic year as well, depending on how much use we're getting out of them. If there's specific things that are changing in our environment and our culture on campus, off campus. So it's designed to really be kind of our most flexible service that students can also register for online, can use as needed. You can show up every week if you want to. You can show up once if you need that. You can work on building coping skills or connecting with other students or just kind of having a space to chill. And so you can access those online, no wait time. United Support Network is another great resource that students can get connected with right away. That's our peer support program that we offer through the Counseling Center. So Counseling Center staff train students to provide basic mental health resources for other students, provide peer support for other students. They also do monthly social events that are really fun. We also have mind-body programs. So those are longer, like more in-depth workshops on topics like mindfulness, like self-compassion, like managing your mood. And students can sign up for it also online. There is a limit on the number of students that can sign up for each of those, but they tend to be really well used. A lot of students really get a lot out of them, and you don't need to come in for an initial consultation or anything. You don't need a specific referral. A lot of these services you can really just kind of sign up for and access online. And so when students do come in, they have that initial consultation and they talk with us about what's going on, their mental health history. If they do get a referral for individual therapy, we'll usually also talk about other resources that we offer through the Counseling Center and also help to connect students with other resources outside of our office as well. Like through the Wellness Center, if students are struggling with food insecurity, we'll help connect them with the pop-up pantry. If they need more financial support, we can connect them with the Dean of Students Office with financial aid. So the way that we bring in students in the Counseling Center is really taking a comprehensive look at the things that are affecting their mental health and helping to connect folks to all kinds of different resources that are going to help kind of stabilize them and help them get to a better place mentally.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It sounds like there's a really like a large range of things that that the Counseling Center covers, and it's really comprehensive and holistic. The approach that that you all are taking to help students in counsel and treatment. And then yeah, And I think one of the things that I found really interesting is that individual, like you had said, that individual sessions are like the waiting period is usually around a week. And like I think that like for a lot of students, like when I hear that there's like a wait, like sometimes I might think, oh, there's like a waiting period. It's probably going to be like a month, 2 months, and I'm not going to be able to get in. And so just understanding that I think is really helpful for students like us. And then also like always being available in times of crisis. And we know that those can happen at any time for a student. Yeah, and just being available there, I think is really valuable for us. I wanted to kind of touch on one of the topics that you had mentioned, which was the drop-in spaces. And I also saw those on your website, and I was kind of curious if you might be able to even more so elaborate on those and describe like what does, I know you described it as chill, but what exactly does the drop-in space look like? And yeah, what can we expect from that?
Yeah, so the drop-in spaces are a new program that we're launching this semester. We've actually only been running them for about a month or so at this point. So they're brand new, and it's something that isn't commonly offered at a lot of other college counseling centers. So it's pretty new, not just for us, but for college counseling in general. A lot of places will have like drop-in support groups and stuff that focus more on like interpersonal processing type things. And usually it'll be more expectations that folks are consistently attending, or that if they're showing up, that they're engaging in a specific way. The drop-in spaces are really designed to be as flexible as possible. So if you, for instance, for the neurodivergent drop-in space, if you're a student that has ADHD and you're just like me, I have ADHD, I'm one of the facilitators for a neurodivergent drop-in space. And sometimes it's a lot easier to work on homework when there's just somebody else sitting there with you. It doesn't necessarily need to be a space where you come and process specific mental health concerns related to that identity or that community, but it's a space for folks to show up and really use it however they need to. So we recognize that the traditional therapy model of meeting one-on-one with a therapist works for a lot of folks. It doesn't necessarily work for everybody. And so in our effort to really meet students where they are and provide a broad range of services, because we have a very diverse campus that needs diverse things, we want to make sure that we're providing services that are going to meet those needs. And so the drop-in spaces, you can really come if you have if you want to develop a new skill. Let's say, again, for the neurodivergent space, if you have ADHD and you're like, I'm struggling with completing assignments. Like, I can get the ball rolling. I tend to come up with a lot of creative ideas when I'm writing, but those last couple pages and turning it in on time is a struggle for me. We can help you work through, okay, what is getting in the way of being able to turn it in? Where exactly is the roadblock? How can we help with that? How can we help build accountability? So you can develop new skills in that way. You can build relationships with other students. Just a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the horrors of driving while neurodivergent. Even things like how we experience grief and loss differently. The assessment and testing process for things like autism, ADHD, learning disabilities like dyslexia, dysgraphia. So it's really a space to kind of use however you want to, however you need to, and whenever you need to. There's no obligation to come weekly. There's no obligation to show up on time or stay for the whole time. So they really work pretty well for students that might have irregular schedules or might be really busy. And students that aren't necessarily looking for that commitment of needing to come to something on a weekly basis. And I think one of the coolest things about them is that the spaces are facilitated by counseling center staff member who are part of those communities. So for the international student space, it's facilitated by counseling staff members who are or have been international students. The first gen space is facilitated by counseling center staff members that have been first generation students. And so it's not just us as mental health professionals saying, this is how you need to live your life that we've had. We recognize that these specific communities might need something different, might need something more than we would be able to offer in traditional one-on-one therapy. So let's have the flexibility to be able to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It sounds like these are a really accessible and supportive space for students. And yeah, thank you for sharing a little bit more about the drop-in spaces. I'm kind of curious. What would you please highlight like the initiatives that are most pertinent and useful to students right now?
Yeah, there's a lot going on right now. I think the drop-in spaces are one of those new initiatives. I won't talk about them again because I just did. But the drop-in spaces are one of those new initiatives that we're doing to really engage in more community-based support. And I'd say that that's probably the biggest initiative that's going on at the Counseling Center right now. Because at a campus of 34,000 students, there are roughly 20 of us. So a lot of the emphasis that we're looking at right now, and as we're currently like in the search process for a new assistant vice chancellor for student health and wellness, the long-term vision is really moving more towards a model of community-based mental health support. And so one thing that I'm working on in my role as our outreach director is looking at how do we build out a curriculum for faculty and staff to help students who may be having general mental health concerns, students that are stressed about assignments, who are going through a breakup or a rough time with their friends or conflict with their roommates, who are struggling with the transitions that COVID brings. How do we help empower our faculty and staff to be able to support students in that? And how do we support students in being there for each other in those ways too? So even though the Counseling Center is really the primary resource for mental health services on campus, we're not the only people that can help support mental health. And we recognize that asking that comes with the obligation that we as mental health professionals also provide training, provide resources, provide support in order to really build out and provide a strong foundation for that community-based model. So I'm right now working on a curriculum for faculty and staff around things like how to support students that have experienced recent violence or sexual assault or hate crime, students that have experienced recent trauma, what to do to initially respond to them, how to help connect them to the Counseling Center, to the Campus Advocacy Network, how we navigate supporting students with disabilities in the classroom and outside of the classroom. So a lot of these common concerns that faculty and staff will often be kind of on the front line of hearing about from students. How do they respond to that in a way where students can feel heard, can feel validated, can feel supported, and also help connect students to the really wide network of mental health resources that we have on campus. So that's probably the biggest initiative that we have going on right now, is kind of looking at how do we extend the impact of our work beyond the walls of the Counseling Center.
Yeah, outstanding. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that yeah, that additional part where the team is really looking to help students not only like confront their mental health and be able to treat that, but also to find additional resources outside of just the counseling center, which a lot of students are a lot of the time in the work that my team and I do, we recognize that a lot of students are unaware of, right? Like a lot of the resources that the university has to provide for students are are not necessarily known by all students, and so being able to be a bridge there and really provide those resources and provide those referrals and help students understand that they do have access to more resources, I think is really beneficial. So it's cool to hear that that's also something that the counseling center is actively engaged in as well. I think that one of the things that you had mentioned was like the different types of things that come up for students, and like especially like I think when a lot of people think about like one of the things that a lot of students experience in college is it's like some students experience like loneliness, and so we were kind of talking about wondering about like if you could talk about the effects of loneliness on students' mental health in general from like a clinical perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Loneliness, I don't think it's talked about often enough for the impact that it has on people's mental health. I think it's increasingly being recognized as a public health crisis, particularly among younger generations. I know a lot of our recent surveys showed that pretty consistently that Gen Z adults, so folks around like ages 18 to 22, our typical undergrad population, is the loneliest generation right now, which is kind of a reverse from previous trends. It used to be older adults tended to be a lot lonelier than younger adults, but we're really seeing that dynamic shift quite a bit. A lot of that has to do with the pandemic. A lot of that has to do with increased mobility of folks moving further away from the place that they grew up and the friends that they've built throughout their lives. A lot of that has to do with how specifically we use social media. But we know that loneliness, regardless of what's causing it, tends to be linked to a whole host of negative mental health outcomes, physical health outcomes. It's related to increased stress, difficulty sleeping and lower quality of sleep, high blood pressure, heart disease, depression, anxiety. I could go on, but you get the point. It's really, really tough to feel lonely. And one of the most difficult things about loneliness is that it is kind of a double whammy in a lot of ways for mental health, because we know that social support is usually one of the strongest buffers against the negative effects of a lot of mental illnesses. So if you're experiencing anxiety, if you're experiencing depression, they tend to be a lot more severe and a lot more long-term when you don't have social support already. So that loneliness not only can cause anxiety and depression, but can exacerbate anxiety and depression. So it's something that we've been seeing getting increasingly worse and increasingly severe since the start of the pandemic. I apologize if you can hear that behind me. We have loud traffic. But it's something that we've really been seeing getting a lot worse since the start of the pandemic. There are a lot fewer opportunities for people to organically interact with each other, to get to know each other, to deepen the connections that they have. And so it's something that we at the Counseling Center are seeing a lot, but I don't think it's talked about often enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for bringing some visibility to that, and kind of just acknowledging the reality and the the challenge that students are facing when it comes to that. I'm kind of curious. Right now, we're still in the COVID-19 pandemic. Currently, when we're filming this video, and so I'm kind of curious what specific challenges you are seeing at the Counseling Center directly related to students and COVID-19.
Yeah, obviously loneliness is a really big one, particularly for college students right now. I think some of the other things that we're seeing, especially, are like unpredictability and difficulty with all the different transitions that are happening, uncertainty about what public health guidance to follow, when that might conflict with your personal sense of safety or health. I think especially we're seeing that with students with disabilities, students that are immunocompromised, but in general, having a lot of that unpredictability and not necessarily knowing, okay, am I going to be going to classes in person next week? Am I expected to wear a mask? Do I need to get another booster shot? Not knowing what the future is going to bring causes a lot of stress. It releases a lot of cortisol. It causes a lot of anxiety. So that unpredictability in general tends to be really stressful for folks. We don't often have people coming into the Counseling Center naming that specifically and saying, like, I'm coming in for mental health services because everything feels really unpredictable. But what we see is people having that impacting the way that they're planning, the way that they're responding to mental health concerns. We see it underlying a lot of concerns that folks have when we're helping folks to kind of troubleshoot and taking a solution-focused approach and saying, okay, what can we do to address this social anxiety? It's a lot more limiting to say, okay, we really don't know if you're going to be in person over the next couple of months, if you're going to have those opportunities to really run into people and start having a casual conversation with them to practice overcoming that social anxiety. So it's harder to plan as well. And it's harder to come up with like specific treatment plan in a lot of ways that relies on knowing what the next couple of weeks are going to bring, what the next couple of months are going to bring. So that unpredictability is a really big one. We're also seeing a lot of grief, a lot of loss, not just in terms of like death specifically. We're seeing a lot of that, but we're also seeing a lot of grief and loss over the hobbies that people used to have, the opportunities that people used to have, the ways of interacting, connecting with people that we used to have. There's a lot that's changed since the onset of the pandemic, and there's a lot that we've lost. And so it's really important to acknowledge that and to make space for that, because I don't think that we necessarily think about that as a grieving process. Normally, when we think about grief, we think about death, we think about loss, but we don't necessarily think about the major life changes that we've undergone and how that really needs breathing room as well. I think the last thing that we see, there's a lot of different ways that COVID impacts us, but the last kind of major thing that we see is financial strain. People either losing jobs, losing income, not being certain if they're going to be scheduled. A lot of, especially like college students that are working in retail, working in the service industry, working in spaces that are more kind of public facing, that may potentially be considered frontline workers, experiencing a lot more stress related to that, or not knowing whether or not the restaurant that they're working at is going to be open. So financial strain both directly on students and indirectly just because of the economic costs of the pandemic, the ability to get and maintain a job after graduation, students' parents and family members losing jobs, losing income as well, and not being able to support students in the way that they used to. The financial impact is also huge, and I think underlies a lot of other stress that folks are experiencing right now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for bringing some visibility and like validating like some of those experiences that a lot of students are feeling right now. And then I'm kind of curious. I've never been to the counseling center, and a lot of our students haven't. And so like for students that have never been there, I'm kind of curious. What can I expect the environment to look like the people to be like on the first day? Would you like walk me through like the steps of a new student who was interested in some services at the counseling center?
For sure. Practically speaking, it is going to differ depending on what service you're using to initially get connected with us. In general, you can really expect us to be pretty warm people, caring people. We tend to be pretty down to earth. We really value taking a collaborative approach to planning what kind of interventions we can use, what kind of resources we can connect you with. So a lot of that process is really, at least initially, kind of figuring out what is it that you're needing right now, what is it that you're struggling with right now, and what are all the different resources that we can connect you with to help you out. So depending on the specific service that you're using to initially connect with us, if it's, for instance, like initial consultation, we'll be spending a lot of time reviewing your mental health history and planning treatment. If it's a crisis appointment, typically we're going to be focusing on that immediate situation, making sure that you're safe. If it's one of the services that you register for online and attend virtually, like the drop-in spaces, single session appointments, the drop-in spaces I already talked about a little bit, they tend to be sometimes like more casual, more conversational. So it can be a nice entry point for students that are a little bit more worried about some of the formality that might come with traditional therapy sessions. The single session appointments are usually really kind of solution focused for students that have like maybe one or two specific concerns that they're coming in with. So there's really not like a one size fits all approach when folks come to the counseling center for the first time. It's really kind of depending on the service that you're using, your specific needs. So we really try to kind of customize it to what specifically you're looking for.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I think it was really important that you highlight there's different facets of the counseling center, and it addresses different, all different kinds of needs. And I'm glad that the people in counseling center really work collaboratively and really provide that guidance for new students who come in, and let them know really what each of the services are about and how different they can be from one another, but ultimately the priorities for them. And I would like to talk a little bit, go back a little bit about, you talk a lot about loneliness and how that's one of the big driving factor for students' mental health. And I know that the counseling center recently collaborated with an application, which is an app. I would like you maybe to talk a little bit about that and how it might address loneliness that students can feel nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. So the kind of impetus for us doing that collaboration was the letter that the Mental Health Coalition wrote last year, where they recommended that the counseling center do more to expand apps that are available to students. And so I had seen that and was looking into a couple different apps, and kind of by happenstance through one of my professional organization listservs I'm a part of, had heard that NOD was doing a grant program for universities to make NOD available for this academic year and next academic year for free. So I was like, okay, I'll apply for it on the off chance that we might get it. And we got the grant worth about $30,000 over this and next academic year to make NOD available to all UIC students for free. An app, I keep saying app, NOD is an app that's designed specifically for college students, and particularly around building and strengthening social connections. So it's especially helpful for students that are experiencing some kind of loneliness, depression, things like that. But it's really helpful, I think, for pretty much everybody, especially as we're coming off the pandemic and learning how to reconnect with people, learning how to interact with people again. When you first use the app, you can specify where you tend to struggle in the process of building connections, where you want to focus on building skills, building knowledge, and what your specific goals are. And then the app provides prompts that can help you take action to address those goals, short exercises and in-app activities that can help you process social experiences, engage in self-reflection. And it also offers perspectives from other students on the benefits and challenges of making those connections as well. And I think it's especially helpful because forming new social habits is really like building a new muscle. You have to keep at it over time. It's going to feel a little bit harder in the beginning, but the more that you have that structure, the more that you have that guidance that the app provides, it really helps folks exercise that muscle and build that muscle and hold themselves accountable to maybe trying a couple of different things, seeing how they work. If they're not working as well, trying them in a different way, figuring out something else. So it really helps students with that kind of creative problem solving process as they're addressing loneliness, as they're building social connections, and as they're expanding their networks some more.
Yeah, thank you so much for explaining that. I think it's wonderful that we were able to get the grant and get this app really reach all kinds of students at UIC, and we see this involvement in technology in kind of mental health services. I wonder if there are any future plans to incorporate more application perhaps, or online programs that can help students' mental health, like how NOD might do them.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the hope. And that's one of the nice things about getting the grant right now, because we can see the utilization, we can see how many students are using it, what they're using it for, how helpful it is. So it's a really helpful way for us to kind of pilot that, since it's not something that UIC has provided before. So we're hoping that we're going to get enough utilization of the app that we can justify extending the contract with them even after the grant period is over, and hopefully add even more apps to our offerings. There are a lot of mental health apps out there. There are some specifically for college students. There are some for broader audiences. So over the next academic year or so, we're going to be looking more into the utilization, figuring out if that's something that is worth investing more in. I personally think that it really is. I think online resources are one of the first places that a lot of folks are going to turn when they need mental health support. And it's a really efficient way to get a lot of resources to as many students as possible. So it's going through apps, going through websites is one of the ways to meet students where they are right now. And we're constantly trying to adapt and evolve so that we're finding new ways to meet student needs, to really respond to where students are going first for their mental health needs, and to make mental health resources as widely available as possible. And so even though there are not enough of us, we'd need a staff like 1,200 people to be able to do like individual therapy for every single student at the school. But by providing an app, we can get all of those resources, we can get that support, we can help create a somewhat customizable program of really challenging loneliness, building social connections that can help students and help the students that they're connecting with in a way that isn't quite as resource intensive, but can be just as effective.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think you highlight very importantly, like the counseling center can be limited with staff, but then the impact of the counseling center you guys are trying to reach even further outside the counseling center walls, and this includes from your outreach programs and then to this applications, and hopefully get the best services for students. And I would like to go back a little bit. I know that app really puts the basis on kind of like being able to relate to other students, being able to understand that there are students who are in their shoes, and kind of like there's a lot of suggestions in the app itself and how you might approach a certain challenge as a student. So I see this peer-to-peer connection that's happening in the app. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how students can support each other during difficult times of loneliness, or transitioning from COVID-19, or even if during COVID-19 itself.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think one of the most challenging things about mental health concerns like depression, anxiety, loneliness is that it often convinces people that they're the only ones feeling that way. And I think especially as we've seen the tail end of COVID, we know that loneliness is not just one or two people. It's something that is incredibly common. I think can recognize that in an abstract way, that isn't true. And like you might have a therapist tell you that, you might have a professor tell you that. Hearing that directly from other students, like you can on Nod, hits different. It really normalizes that desire to connect more deeply, more authentically, in an effective way. It reduces some of the stigma around talking about it too, which I think is particularly helpful. We get all these cultural messages that like everybody should have this thriving social life, and if you don't, you're a loser. So we get trapped in this really like sort of made up cycle where we feel really isolated, but we're worried about reaching out to other people because we don't want to have to deal with that stigma. And the person next to us is most likely feeling the same way, but neither of us reaches out because we're both afraid of what the other person would think. And so hearing directly from other students, like you can on Nod, a really big piece of it is that a testimonial piece really helps to break that cycle.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I would like to talk about, maybe some of our listeners have that need to want to contribute to student mental health and want to be able to make an impact by themselves. What kind of recommendation would you give to those students who have the desire to help others, maybe around them from their friends or their community, in terms of mental health?
Yeah, for sure. I think the first thing to do is talk about it. And I think Gen Z in particular is really great at this, doing a lot to destigmatize mental health, doing a lot to destigmatize reaching out for support, sharing more mental health information. And so talking about it and normalizing it, making it a regular part of the conversation is one of the most important things that we can do. I think historically, when we've thought about people going to therapy, when we've thought about people using mental health resources, there's been a lot of stigma around it. There's been a lot of shame around it. There's been a lot of silence around it. There's that sort of like, oh, not in my family kind of attitude that a lot of older generations have had, that still exists somewhat in younger generations. But I think we've been doing a lot to really overcome that stigma and really shed that idea that it's something to be ashamed of. So talking about it, being open about it is really important. Learning more about mental health resources and educating each other, I think, is equally important. Like I said, at the Counseling Center, we provide individual therapy, and that tends to be kind of the like poster child for mental health services, not just in college counseling, but outside of college counseling too. When people think about mental health services, usually that's the first thing that they'll think about. So part of it can be helping to dispel some of the myths around individual therapy, really telling people about maybe the experiences that you've had in individual therapy, that other people have had in individual therapy. But part of it's also talking more about things like group therapy that I think a lot of folks can be like really intimidated by, especially I think ironically when folks are concerned about like having social anxiety, or they're like, oh, I just am not used to opening up to other people. That's usually when we're like, okay, that's why group therapy is going to be helpful for you. It gives you that kind of safe environment to practice that, to do that with therapists present to help you examine what's coming up for you in that moment, to try out new ways of interacting with people. So helping to dispel some of those myths and helping to dispel some of that anxiety around reaching out for mental health services is really important. But I also don't think that students should stop at just talking about it. There's a lot that students can do to address their own mental health concerns, to support each other's mental health concerns. Like the drop-in spaces, like you can bring a friend to the drop-in space. You can't really do that with like individual therapy or group therapy. It's not like you can be like, hey, this is my friend Mateen, we're gonna show up to group therapy together. You can do that with the drop-in spaces and say like, okay, I really want to learn more like how to support you with what you're going through right now. Like, let's talk about it in here and figure out how we can do that. Getting involved in USN is another great thing. It's peer-to-peer support, students helping students, it's student-led, and it's a kind of environment where students can really relate to each other and connect and continue those connections outside of the USN space specifically. It's a place to meet new friends that are interested in the same things as you, that are just as passionate and just as interested in mental health. And it's a place to kind of just hang out with people as well. It's one of those sort of pre-built ways to meet other students. Also advocating for systemic change is incredibly important. Like I said, the Mental Health Coalition letter drove us to apply for the NOD app. It was behind a lot of the changes that we've recently made at the Counseling Center website. And so we listen. We're not always able to give everybody everything that they want, but we really do listen. We want you to advocate and tell us what you need. So the more that we can push for systemic change at the Counseling Center and at UIC as a whole to really make our campus a model for how to support student mental health, how to prioritize student mental health, the advocacy that y'all do as students really does have an impact. So please, please, please keep doing that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, and bringing students into the conversation of making change in the community. And then I think you mentioned a really important point about change can be done from something simple, from kind of talking about mental health a little bit more in your friend group to bringing a friend to the drop-in spaces because you want to understand them better. So I think that was kind of like a big highlight of how interesting and really cool this drop-in spaces are, which is a new service for the Counseling Center. So I appreciate you for sharing that. And I think that's all the questions for today. So Steve, thank you so much for coming in with us and answering all our questions. Is there anything, any last remarks that you would like to say?
Hopefully from this, y'all are getting that the Counseling Center is not as intimidating as people sometimes think we are. Hopefully y'all think that I'm a chill, down-to-earth person. I really try to be. I like to let people know that it stays confidential if you killed somebody and ate them for breakfast this morning, but if you're gonna kill somebody and eat them for dinner tonight, I'm gonna have to make some phone calls. We are humans too. We're, I think, generally pretty good people. And we really are passionate about helping students. So please come in, interact with us, have conversations with us, let us know what it is that you need. We're really here to support you. We really want to help to connect you with resources at the Counseling Center, other places on campus, off campus as well. We really want to do all that we can to help support student mental health, and we hope that you'll be our partner in that.
Thank you. Yeah, and I hope all students are feeling more welcome and attracted towards the Counseling Center. And myself, my experience getting to know the Counseling Center better from the website, from the people, it's just really heartwarming and inviting. Yeah.
Yeah, and it sounds like based on our discussion today, it's also very accessible, and it sounds like the Consultation Center does a lot to really be accessible to students. There's a lot of resources to find, like the website, to walk in, and there's plenty of ways to access these resources. And so we really appreciate you taking the time to really provide this information and yeah, pop up with us and join us today. So thank you so much for your time.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.